Tetris, a game as old as games themselves. The premise is simple: a grid and a small assortment of different shaped blocks. Place the blocks into a row and the row disappears. Stack too high and you lose. Survive as long as possible. For decades now, we have competed to see who can last the longest and get the highest score. And from this battle, titans have arose. Jonas Newbar, Khan, Microblizz. But only recently has a new contender arrived. One not known for his bewildering skill, but for that of his child. In 2013, a YouTuber named SuckerPinch created a Tetris AI, an artificial intelligence. The AI had one simple goal: to play Tetris and to get the highest score possible. And so it played. It learned the ins and outs of the game of Tetris. But at its peak, where it had garnered more ability than ever before, it did something peculiar. It paused the game. Over the course of thousands of hours, the AI had determined that the only way to win was to never play at all. At the time, SimCity was revolutionary. Will Wright was coming off the coattails of multiple other games, but none had stuck like SimCity was about to in 1989. The game allowed players to build off their own realistic city in a simulation as close to real life as the world had yet seen. There was traffic, police systems, fires to put out, disasters to handle, and residential and commercial centers to build alike. The genius of the game, though, lied in how all of the systems played together with one another. Players would simply build a new city how they saw fit, and the rest was magic. Sitting back and watching as traffic jams formed, empires grew, and your imagination came to life before your eyes. SimCity became such a huge hit so quickly because of its spin on a genre that was only just in its infancy. Most games at the time focused on putting the player at the center, letting you fly through levels at breakneck pace, eating enemies in Pac-Man, jumping on heads in Super Mario. But SimCity was different. SimCity instead put the focus of the game on the game itself. No longer did you dictate exactly what would happen at every moment. Instead, you merely nudged the game along a path it would ultimately decide for you. An earthquake didn't happen because you told it to. It happened because the game wanted it to. SimCity was the start to a new genre of simulation as opposed to emulation. And players flocked to it in droves as it was a new and exciting way to play a game, one much like real life, where you weren't always in control. Fast forward to the turn of the century, 2000. The United States had just conquered the famed Y2K crash, a concern many had when the clocks turned for next year. Computer systems across the world would crash due to the first two integers of the world not being dynamically stored in most operating systems. The internet age was finally really beginning to take shape in its infancy, and people wore clothes like this. Meanwhile, games were going through their own journey right alongside, and one of those games was named Majesty. It's a lesser-known game I grew up quite fond of as an early child, and what made it so memorable for me was, just like SimCity, how the game was controlled mostly by the computer, not me. In Majesty, your goal was to build a powerful kingdom, leveling up your buildings, creating militiamen, farming resources and sending wizards on expeditions of great power. But what made Majesty different was how the game approached you accomplishing these tasks. You see, in Majesty, you didn't just create a unit and send it into battle. Instead, you created bounties for your heroes to claim through assassination attempts or simply a request to survey some unknown land. My kingdom did not simply do what I told it to. Instead, I ruled like an actual king, by asking for things and hoping that people would follow my lead. And in this system, more interesting things could happen. Thieves could backstab me and take my money. Relationships could be formed, and most importantly, memories made, not from my own volition, but from the game itself. And this style of game had a profound effect on me. For the first time ever, I wasn't the center of the story. The story itself was. It didn't matter what I wanted, it mattered what everyone, myself and NPCs alike, were after. And this small change to the system meant a huge and radical shift into how I viewed the game. No longer could I keep my favorite hero safe. If he decided to charge first into battle and die, there was nothing I could do. No longer did I have control. And many would think this is the antithesis of what makes games great. After all, the fact that we play games is what gives them an edge over movies and radio in the first place. Our ability to have agency and control is what sets the medium apart. Choices in dialogue, meaningful change to the world, that's what makes games great. But there is another thing that can make them great as well. When Bethesda first released Oblivion on the Xbox 360, it was immediately a roaring success. And while this was for a myriad of reasons, one of the main reasons was hype. And one of the most hyped up features for Oblivion was its new Radiant AI system. The system promised that the NPCs in the game would be more than just NPCs. They would have jobs, personalities, routines, and they would act believable in the world as you traveled through it. This turned out to be a bit of an overpromise in the end, but nonetheless, the idea proved intriguing. For millions of gamers, the realization of an actual living, breathing world with distinct and meaningful characters sounded amazing. The sheer thought of a game attempting it warranted press, because it had the potential to breathe life to the worlds we engage with every day. It's one of the great staples of gaming. The ability to create engrossing worlds that suck us in. And the Radiant AI system was a move to the next level, potentially. And as cool as the new classes, enemies, and armor were, some of the best memories of my time in Oblivion was how the world felt living, more so than its predecessors. Even though it was all still very fake, towns and their people put on a great facade that tricked us, especially those of us that were younger at the time, like myself, into absolutely falling in love with the world. Where in previous games you would simply break into a house and steal, now you could slowly stalk your target, learn their routine, and strike at the perfect moment. The world was more believable than before. And yet, even with the cool games that have come before, and the many achievements games in general have really garnered over the past few years, there has still been a lack of focus on the great traits that can make games better. Better artificial intelligence systems that can create believable, interesting, and wacky outcomes for the player, like for how the Tetris AI stopped playing. One of the greatest parts of multiplayer games, in fact, is their ability to create narrative out of nothing. In a single-player game, moments are handcrafted beforehand for the player, so that you can experience something great at the same time as all other players did. In multiplayer, though, these moments are made by your connections with teammates and opponents on the fly. But as this industry pushes forward, it is time to reimagine how dynamic a single-player game can be. Games can be more than pre-recorded and scripted moments like we see in movies and books. They should strive to reach the next echelon. Games that can create narrative on their own. AI systems that can react to one another, worlds with real economy systems, environments that change based on what the NPCs are doing. More and more as game technology advances, people have begged the question, are we living in a simulation? Seeing the worlds come together and come to life to mimic our own has worried some of the possibility of our world simply being a simulation as well. And it is about time that visionaries in the gaming industry can finally make a move to prove this hypothesis. The future of gaming lends itself to many interesting ideas. And one of the most interesting is how games can simulate the real world. How games can create believable worlds, characters, and routines that immerse us more than before. Worlds that are more than merely carefully virtually constructed cities and valleys. Worlds that live on their own, with their own economies, politics, and shifting lines of power. Video game worlds that can live on without us. And just as games have continued to evolve, so has the world with them. From games we learn the power of simulation, the power of living in a world not too unbelievable from our own. And for those that grew up in these simulations, they now in their adulthood live in many others. The stock market of today is too complex to fully understand, yet we stake our bets and convince ourselves we know all. Media companies as of late have controlled our very thoughts through social media platforms and alter the very information we can see. It begs the question, are games becoming more like real life, or is real life becoming gamified? And not a Doom or a Quake, but a Sim City, a Majesty, an Oblivion. A game that feels alive on the surface, that makes you feel like you have an impact, but at the end of the day proves you are nothing but a conductor, driving a train that will carry on its path regardless of what you have to say. A game that tricks you into a false sense of reality, into a realm unto which you don't exist. A game that lets you escape from reality only to realize you never knew reality in the first place. Imagine a future in games with a virtual world that is so believable it can exist without you, and you have no say. A world that can become wholly immersive in its simulation. Imagine a game that plays itself. Thanks for watching, guys. This is a new series I've been interested in for a little while now, and I finally got the courage to put together a video about imagining a game, a new type of game, new types of experiences, and how those would relate to real life and real life events. And I think it's a very unique series that speaks to my voice, and I can't thank you guys enough for all the support, whether that's on Twitch or the upcoming Patreon. And I really do appreciate you all coming in and just giving your love. And if you have ideas for future videos in this section about imagining new games and topics, feel free to join the Discord. We have a new channel dedicated specifically to these types of videos, and I'd love to get some of your guys' input, as well as graphics, art, and any way we could come together as a community and help. So as always, guys, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.